Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now, I have spent the weekend fooling around with oil paints and making a god-awful mess of things. So, I thought it would be fun to come back and share some of what I've figured out and learned and basically been enjoying playing around with. I have done Death Guard on the channel before, of course, but oils are new territory, and I wanted really to show you that it's nothing to be afraid of. If you haven't given it a shot before, you're looking at somebody who is a novice. You know, myself, I've painted maybe 3 things now with oils, and this is the result that you can get. So don't be afraid to give it a shot if you've ever been put off by it. Now, all of the paints will be listed in the description along with the recipe for the base. So let's get things going nice and quick and get started. So what I've got here is my unfortunate victim. Now you might be wondering, why Death Guard? And the short answer is because I really like them. And on top of that, I've done the color scheme a couple of times in videos before, so I can skip over a couple of bits. The colors for this are going to be in the description all the same. The base coats will be listed there. And I will actually do some of the highlighting on screen, so don't worry, you're not going to miss that. This will work on pretty much any Space Marines that you can imagine. You might just want to tweak some of the ratios as we come to them. But all the same, here is our test piece. Now he has been given, once I've finished applying his base coats, he's been given a varnish. I've used Munitor and varnish in this case. And it's not necessarily to protect the paint job underneath. The reason for that is to reduce the surface tension on the miniature. So when we apply our oils, the capillary action, we're talking serious physics here today, folks, it's going to help the oils flow into all of the recesses very easily. You're going to see some serious slurpage today, so let's get started. Now, this is actually a really interesting demonstration. I was mixing up some of this earlier, and as I hit the edge of my palette here, what's happened is that oil paint has gone all the way around. That's that capillary action in progress. So there you go, something to... Now what I'm going to start with, I have these little cheap oil paints. I just picked them up off of Amazon. And I'm going to put a wee blob of a brown and a wee blob of black just up on the edge of that little roundel there. You'll see here I've got a little bit of odorless thinners. I've had mixed results with some of these that I've gotten online before, but white spirit will work very well pretty much no matter what. If you struggle to find an odorless thinner, that will work. Nonetheless, you can just open the windows, make sure that you are ventilating properly. So what I'm doing now is just experimenting a bit, using my brush, which is wet with a little bit of thinner, to play with the proportions of the brown and the black in my little puddle there. I want to add quite a bit of black for this one. And then I just want to make sure that it's going to flow properly, so play with it up the edges. And yeah, that looks about right. I'm going to swap to a smaller brush to apply this though. Now, if you are anything like me and you normally lick your brushes to bring them to a point, don't. So now I've got my mix the way that I would like. Let's just apply this over the entire miniature. If you want to be quite precise about it, like say you're painting, I don't know, Ultramarines or something, what you can do is just dab a little bit on and let it do its thing without having to guide it into all of the recesses. But because I'm doing Death Guard, I want a slightly messier finish. I'm going to add a bit of brown into there actually. It's not quite as brown as I would like. Now if you apply it and it is way too thick, what you can do is quickly work on your palette there, add a little bit more white spirit, and you can thin it out and move it around. So that is about the consistency I want. I'm now going to apply this over my entire Death Guard. Oh, that's messy. And part of what is fun about this, I find, is that you're actually quite free to play with your mix on the fly. So black, brown, in any combination you like. And if you find there's too much of it going on, just a bit of white spirit on your brush to thin it out and move it around. So yeah, this is definitely worth experimenting with. It's a lot of fun. But what we'll do is come back in a second once I'm satisfied that I've got roughly the right mix on all of this Legionnaire. Now I've let him dry in the sun for about 10 minutes. It's not strictly necessary, but I do find it easier to come back and work with it once it's a little more settled. What I've got is some fresh white spirit, and I'm going to load up and then dab off most of that from one of these little makeup applicators. What we'll do then is just lightly, almost like dry brushing, flick it along some of the higher points of the miniature. You'll see we clean up some of that gunk very, very quickly. You don't want to go mad with this, and if you're worried about the control, what you can do is swap to a brush for some of this, which I might do in a couple of seconds. So, for example, this one's got a little brush on the other end. Same procedure, load it up with some white spirit, dab most of it off. Then you can start shifting things around. And this is the advantage of the curing time in oils. So I want his chest to be pretty clean. And likewise, if you're worried you've taken too much off, you can go back to your white spirit and your little mix that's on the palette there, and just have an experiment with leading it where you want it to go, adding a bit more on, or just shifting around what's already there. Now, this is the fun part, to be quite honest. So for example, in his little shin there, what I can do is with my wet brush, take some of that excess that's gathered up around the front, guide it around to the sides, and smooth out his leg all at the same time. So at this point really I'm just mucking around. My brush is damp but not wet, and yeah, it's a wash with a delete button. So as I'm shifting this around, I'm exposing a little bit more of the bare primer underneath, and it's working quite well to get a fair bit of depth very, very quickly here. Now once again, I've given him about 20 to 30 minutes in the sun just to dry. You'll see there are still a couple of slightly shiny spots, but we're not too worried about that. We can carry on from here. What I'm going to do now is over on my palette, I've got a little bit of an ochre color. This is Venetian orange brown, but any ochre or yellowish sort of grimy, grungy color will work fine for this. We don't want very much on the brush at all. Let's put that aside. And what I'll do is pick a spot here on his shoulder pad, just dab a wee bit of that in there, put that brush down, and then go back for my little feathering one. It's nice and dry now. What I'm going to do is just work this out and get a little bit of a faded rust effect there. So for example, again, just a little dot on his chest, and this is going to be a bit trickier to feather out, but that won't matter too much. Just with the very tip of the brush, you can push it around and basically discolor things a little. It's nice and grimy. So I'm now going to have some fun. Like you see, this is a smidgen, the tiniest bit of paint on your brush. Just pop it on where you want it to be, where you want the source of that rust, and then feather it out so it looks a bit more natural. Now this you don't need to thin down at all. And as well, it doesn't have to be straight feathering motions. What you can do, blop some on, and then with your grubby little dry brush, just dab it out almost like it's a texture paint. Smudge that around a bit. So yeah, this is where you can have a lot of fun, just experimenting with the look. I have found one or two spots that were a little bit wet still, and I've gotten some kind of funky discoloration as a result. But honestly, that works just fine for what I want from this look. So have fun experimenting. Let's make a mess. And the same principle applies if you put on too much. Here is my little bit of white spirit in a brush, and I can thin that out, get rid of it, or put it where I want it to go. And of course, you can thin down that mix, same as we did with the original grime, and just dot it into a few places to get a runny, bleh, mess. I'm really going overboard with this dude, I'll admit, but I kind of want to... I'm just enjoying making him grimy, so I might as well. Now, after I've finished applying all of my gunk to this miniature, this is what I've got. A few areas I've had to go back and tweak it with some white spirit, and some of them just worked out the way I was hoping from the outset. Now, ordinarily, before applying a varnish, you want to wait for 24 to 48 hours, the longer the better. So if this doesn't quite turn out the way I would like, I will know why. But before we go into our highlights, I do want to apply a satin varnish. I'm going to use Munitorum varnish again so that I can paint over the top of it without having to worry about lifting any of the still wet oils. Now I'm pretty certain that my varnish is okay, and what we're going to do now is really only a couple of highlights. I'm starting first of all, this is True Brass from the Army Painter. This is one of the new metallic colors, and it's quite similar to something like Liberator Gold, but a little bit more silver. So what I'm going to do is just a few, I don't want a complete straight line on the shoulder pads. What I'm going to do is just flick in some parts, just to give us a little rough edge, which looks like it's slightly chipped, which will suit our dinged up gold pretty well. In the same vein, I'm going to use here Mithril on the metallic parts. Any light silver will do the job, of course. I'm just using this because, honestly, I'm quite enjoying using these Army Painter metallics. They've been pretty good out of the bottle. If you do choose to highlight his gun, a little bit of deep grey will be fine for that. You could also use uniform grey here if that's what you've got. It's up to you. Deep grey has a very faintly bluish tint to it, I find, which actually sets off this stuff quite nicely. And then finally, in the same manner as I did the other highlights, I'm going to do just a few scratches of white. This is not going to show up all that much at a distance, but when you pick them up, it's going to look cool. You do not need to do a huge amount of this, but you can use it to emphasize some of the weathering that you've done. You don't have to highlight every edge either. Just pick some bits where you want it to look like some of that weathering is a little more fresh. So once I'm done with this, that's the highlights done, I'll go ahead and pop his base on him. Now that I will put the recipe for in the description. Let's get a look at this fella once he is all finished. And so there at last, our Death Guard Trooper is complete. And that is still a minimum of paints. I'm actually quite impressed with the result for how little work and investment actually went in there. It's a lot of fun, and I did enjoy the ability to go back to areas that I thought I might have messed up and either add a little more or take a little away. It's super easy being able to tweak the oils for as long as they're still workable, and you've got quite a large window for that. So you can see, hopefully, how this would apply to all sorts of different legions, or even chapters if you want to use probably a closer to pure black. I wouldn't make it quite so brown and grimy if I was going to do 40k Marines, a more modern look, but that's up for you to play around with. I really enjoy just mixing stuff up on the palette and going nuts with it. So as always, thank you very much to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, including my gorgeous producers who are showing up on screen now. Thank you so much for your support, folks. You keep this channel ticking. Now, any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Twitter and Instagram are both linked there too. So, thank you very much for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.